In this video, we're going to go over section 1.4 from your textbook, which is called Variations of a Conditional. This section is pretty short, and the homework is also pretty short, so this should hopefully not take you too much time. There are three variations of a conditional. If you remember, a conditional is the same thing as an implication. It's those if-then statements. So there are three different variations of a conditional. There's the inverse, the converse, and the contrapositive. So we're going to go through each one individually. The inverse, and I would not write anything down until we get a few slides in, and then I'll tell you what to write down. I have a little table that summarizes all of this in a lot shorter words than we have here. So it says the inverse of the conditional, if P then Q, is the compound statement, if not P, then not Q. We form the inverse of the conditional by negating the antecedent and the consequent, so the beginning and the end. So if you have P implies Q, the inverse is not P implies not Q. The converse of the conditional, if P then Q, is the compound statement, if Q then P. So that is, we form the converse by interchanging the beginning and the ending. So instead of having P implies Q, we have Q implies P. So you just flip them around. The contrapositive of the conditional, if P then Q, is the compound statement, if not Q, then not P. So you're flipping the beginning and the ending, and you're negating it. So the contrapositive of P implies Q is not Q implies not P. This is what I would write down. So if you want to take a second and pause the video and write this down. Now these are all related statements, but there are specific ones that their truth or their validity is related. So for example, if the given conditional is true, then it follows that the contrapositive is true. Okay, so if the given conditional is true, then it follows that the contrapositive is going to be true. And then similarly, if the inverse is true, then it follows that the converse will be true. So you can see the ones that kind of match up. So these don't all mean the same thing, but some of them do imply the truth of another statement. So let's look at an example. These really should not cause you too much grief. These should be pretty easy. Our first example says, using the statements P, you are compassionate, and Q, you contribute to charities, we're going to write the inverse, the converse, and the contrapositive of the conditional. Alright, so the inverse. We just found that the inverse, if we're looking at our little table here, the inverse is right here. So the inverse is not P implies not Q. Alright, so not P, that would be you are not compassionate. And not Q, that would be you do not contribute to charities. So that statement is going to be if, because we see the little arrow there, that means it's an if-then statement. If you are not compassionate, then you do not contribute to charities. So that would be the inverse of the conditional. Now the converse. If we look back at our little table, the converse is the third one down right here. All right, so just Q implies P, so we're just switching them around. So that would be, if you contribute to charities, then you are compassionate. And again, your sentence doesn't have to be exactly the same. Remember, we said that oftentimes you can omit the word then. That's totally fine. We do that a lot in our just everyday speech. And the same goes for whenever you type these in on D2L when we're doing our quizzes. If your sentence doesn't match mine exactly, that's okay. I can always go back in and manually give you credit for those. But on WebAssign, they're just going to be multiple choice, so you won't have to actually type anything in on WebAssign. All right, and then our last one, the contrapositive. This is our last slide, our last example. The contrapositive, if we look at our little table here, the contrapositive is where we switch the order and then we negate them. So not Q implies not P. So not Q, that would be you do not contribute to charities, and not P would be you are not compassionate. So if you do not contribute to charities, then you are not compassionate.